bam bim bam bim bam bam bim bam bam
Bum
bam.
bum.
Bam bam bam.
Da 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 da.
Dum bam bam. Dum bam bam bim bam
Bum bum bum. Da 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 da.
bam bam bam. Dum bam bam. Bam bam bim bam 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 bam. Dum bam bam bam. Dum
Da da.
bam bim bam.
Da 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 da.
Bam bam bim bam bam bim bam
Bum
bam.
bum.
Da-da-dum,
Ay, da 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 da.
da-da-da-dum, bam bam bam
Ay, da.
bam bam bim bam bim bam 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 bam
Da 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 da.
da-da-dum, bam bim bam 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 bam
Da da da.
da-da-da-dum, bam da-da-da-dum,
Ay, da.
bam 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 bam
Da da da.
da-da-dum, bam bam bam
Da
bam
da.
bam 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 da-da-dum da-da-dum bam bim bam 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 da-da-dum bam bim da-da-dum bam 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 ay ram bam 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 bim bam bam bim bam 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 ram bam bim bam 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 bim bam bam bim bam 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 bim bam bim bam ay ram bam 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 bim bam 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 bam.
I'm not on the video.
Chaim, everybody.
L'chaim, Rabbi.
Today is Gimel Tammuz. It's 27 years and going on to 28, celebrating the Rebbe's not only accomplishment, but the Rebbe's life. Not that he lived, but in the present tense. As the Rebbe said about his father-in-law, that since he left the confinement of the body, he's more active and more productive and more successful than ever before. It's almost as to say that the Rebbe's 40 years of leadership in a body, as great as he was then, and he was awesomely great, since then, it exponentially, his greatness, his holiness, his power to influence constantly grows. And today, which is Gimel Tammuz, the third day of Tammuz, which some 27 years ago seemed to be, not seemed to be, it was. I mean, it was a terrible upheaval. It was a shock that the Rebbe who we were expecting to lead us to messianic redemption, suddenly his body was resting in the ground. And that was a complete shock and mourning and grief and confusion, etc., etc. And it seemed to go against everything that the Hasidim were taught to believe, which is that you can't have a generation without a leader. It's not possible that God should leave his flock without a shepherd. We cannot even imagine a Jewish nation traveling in the wilderness without a Moses. And suddenly, where, what, how, what's going to happen? And immediately we began to see that there was a transition. The Rebbe is still here, still leading, still encouraging, still blessing, still creating miracles, etc. And this continued day after day, week after week, month after month. And not only have people seen and experienced the direction of the Rebbe, they find it easier to access his guidance. So there are probably thousands of people that when they need an answer, which they felt only the Rebbe could answer, they actually open up one of his like 30 volumes of letters, and with innocent and pure faith, they ask the question. They take a good resolution that they're going to increase in Judaism or holiness. They put their letter in a book, and when they open up the book, it's uncanny. I mean, so many times the letter that they open up randomly is the answer that they need to hear. Whether it's a question, should I move or not move? If it's a question of, should I take an operation or not? If it's a question of something about family.
No, thanks so much. I appreciate it.
In the thousands of letters
No, quiet.
that the Rebbe
Quiet.
has, the thousands of letters that the Rebbe has, the answers are absolutely astounding. So Hasidim began to realize very quickly that the Rebbe is still the Rebbe, but greater than before. Now, I want to point out something. I'm not going to define the Rebbe, other than to say, as we all could easily understand without being a chassid, that the Rebbe was the leader and is the leader of Klal Yisrael. And first and foremost, the Rebbe is a tzaddik, a righteous person. So someone once mentioned, what is the difference between a tzaddik and a Rosh HaYeshiva, the head of a school? So this person was cynical. And he said, if a person is the head, he's the dean of higher education. What makes him the dean? And we're talking about not in a secular, in a Jewish form. He has the most Talmud. He has the most analysis. He's a Gaon. He's a genius in Torah. Well, you could always test such a person. So if a guy says, I had this and this advanced kollel for Talmudic studies, and I give the classes, and I am essentially, the teacher. There's always a way to measure it. You get another Torah scholar to talk with him. If he could hold his own, if they could get involved in an analysis, etc., then we know that this guy knows his stuff. But if he just claims to have the position of being wise and knowledgeable in Torah, but is not, then we could easily reveal that he's a fraud. But if a person says, if a person is rumored to be a tzaddik, is there any way you could measure? I mean, he looks holy, he talks about holiness, he acts holy, but is he holy? One person put it, children learn by trial and error how to get out of school. So a kid has a test and they're not ready to be tested. Of course, they wake up in the morning, they're not feeling well. Incidentally, they really are not feeling well. They don't want to go to school. Mommy comes in, why aren't you getting dressed? Oh, Mommy, I don't feel good. What's wrong, Shefala? What's wrong? Oh, my head hurts. I think I have fever. Little does he realize, his mother puts her hand on his forehead, gives him a kiss, boobala, you don't have any fever, get dressed, you gotta go to school. Okay? Kid realizes you can't fool mommy by saying you have a fever. Well, a month later, again he has a test. He's not looking forward to being tested. So he stays in bed. She comes in, what's wrong, Shefala? I have a stomach ache. Where does it hurt? All over. Well, how do you prove that a person doesn't have a stomach ache? You can't prove it. Kid says he has a stomach ache, and you can't send a kid to school if he has a stomach ache. His belly hurts. But you can send a kid to school who says, I can't go because I think I have 109 fever. And there's nothing wrong with the kid. So when it comes to certain individuals, if an individual says, I think you should show me honor and respect because I am a profound Torah scholar, there's a way to take his measure. Test him. If you can't do it, someone else can. But if a person says, I'm a very holy guy, I'm also very honest, and that's why I have to say it. I mean, it sounds like I'm not really being humble, but I am because I want you to know. How do you prove he's not holy? You can't. But then there is actually a way. You see, holiness means a person who's consumed with the fire of love for God. Fire, if you touch fire, not only are you burnt, but fire can kindle a fire. So if a person is a true tzaddik and he has a fiery love for God, he has a fiery love for Torah, he has a fiery love for a fellow Jew, if you touch this tzaddik and you somehow get burnt, somehow you feel the warmth, then you know we are talking about an authentic tzaddik. So if a person can be tested on his Torah knowledge, and then after you test him, or many people test him, he has many students, you truly begin to appreciate his vast understanding of Torah. When a person is a tzaddik and he's able to kindle the soul of man, not by one, not by 100, by thousands and tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands, and over the 70 years of the Rebbe's revealed leadership, perhaps already in the 7 figures as well, people that have been touched by the flame, that have been touched by the fire. Now we know we are talking about authenticity and truth. We're talking about a man of God. And today, which finishes and begins a cycle, 27 years past since he was in the confinement of a body, now starts year 28. All of you know that the number 28 written in Hebrew letters is Chaf and Ches, which is Koach, with more strength and with more intensity. So what kind of a day is today? The answer is Hilula, a day of celebration. What are we celebrating? We're celebrating, at the very least, we're celebrating that God in his infinite kindness gave this generation, me and you, a person who could lead us, guide us, inspire us, teach us, unify us. We're also celebrating that the instructions that this holy tzaddik utters and wishes, we're celebrating that we're part of this. And I'll talk a little bit more about this later, but the idea of how the Rebbe, well, maybe I'll start now, how the Rebbe really made us, incorporated us in his greatness. Okay. I'll say it in an interesting way. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, of blessed memory, he was a profound thinker. He was a master of the English language. He is so eloquent, spoke so beautifully. He was able to take sometimes complicated ideas, complex ideas, and convey it in a wonderful English that people can understand. And amongst his many observations and insights on how he described the Lubavitcher Rebbe, I'll share with you two. He once said as follows: a great leader has many followers. A truly great leader creates truly great followers, but a unique leader creates leaders. There are very extraordinary personalities that we're still privileged to have amongst us. You might know one, I don't know. But they exist. And they have people that are so enthralled with their greatness that they follow this person. They become very loyal, they're dedicated. You could call them Hasidim, you could call them students, you could call them admirers, or you call them followers. The Rebbe was unique. He was a leader who makes leaders. The Rebbe was not interested in having another chassid. He was interested in having another Jew become a leader. And that is something unique amongst all of the great Jewish leaders that we had, certainly in the 20th century, even in the 19th century. We have the great leader who has many followers and sometimes would delegate a follower to do something for him or to do something for the community. But that we should have a tzaddik, a individual that's literally a godly human being, to use his holiness and his charisma to kindle a fire and to take a small candle and light that candle. Now that light, that small candle sheds light. It becomes a leader. You see, it really makes no difference if you have a candle that's 18 feet high or you have a little Hanukkah candle. It's the flame. If the length will only mean how much longer it will burn, but the light that it sheds essentially is the same. The Rebbe took very great people and made them greater. And then the Rebbe took people like us, not necessarily very great. In fact, rather simple. And he lit our candle. And now wherever we go, we shed light. We suddenly find ourselves in a strange situation where we might be in a family gathering and then someone says, has a question like, why do we do this and this? And say, oh, let's ask Yefim. He's the religious guy. Yefim turns around and says, what are you talking about? I'm not a rabbi. Go talk to a rabbi. I don't know. And they look at you in surprise. What do you mean you don't know? Of course you know. You just don't want to tell us. Suddenly, everyone that has their candle lit now is shedding light. People look up to them. People want them to give the answer, to provide inspiration. So you go to a Pesach Seder, and the fellow turns around to this nice lady and says, so what do we do now? She says, why are you asking me? Well, don't you light Shabbos candles? You probably know the right thing to do. The Rebbe often said, if you know only the Aleph Bet, then teach the Aleph Bet. You don't have to pass a course. You don't have to be on the top of a mountain before you help your fellow Jew learn what an aleph is. You don't have to keep all 613 commandments before you give your neighbor a Hanukkah menorah in honor of Hanukkah. That is a leader who makes us into leaders. So yeah, there have been leaders that create followers, but that we should become activists empowered by the Rebbe, this is something absolutely unique. To which Jonathan Sachs also mentioned another thing. When he's met many great people, very intelligent people, very accomplished people, and often when you come in the presence of a dynamic, strong personality, you get a little bit overawed with the personality. The greater the personality, the smaller you feel. So if you could imagine yourself, you have a special love for chemistry, but then you meet someone who has a PhD and an entire lab working under him, and his knowledge of chemistry, and you're very humbled when you meet a person like that. Chances are you won't say anything. You just want to hear what he has to say. You have nothing to add. So in the presence of greatness, you feel small. You're humbled. He said, when a person came to the Rebbe, you walked out feeling like a mountain. The Rebbe made you great. He didn't make you small. The Rebbe saw the potential that you have, that you yourself weren't even aware of. Or as he once said, when someone believes in you more than you believe in yourself, nothing could stop you from that. Today is Gimel Tammuz. It's a great celebration. For one, we are grateful and we are humbled and we are in awe that we have the Rebbe, period. The Rebbe, capitalized. The Lubavitcher Rebbe. You don't see him, he's greater than his body. Can you empirically prove that? Yes, just look around, me and you. The fact that the Rebbe is able to kindle our souls, to empower us to be leaders and teachers, and to look at ourselves, not to see the deficiencies, but to capitalize on the good that we all have. This is a live tzaddik. This is a flame. This is not only a flame, it's a generator of spiritual energy. You know, there are so many, so to speak, stories. One of the thousands from a shlucha, she's now, I believe, in her 80s. She lives in Milano. Her name is Mrs. Gorelick. So they were one of the first shluchim, first emissaries that the Rebbe sent out. And he sent this couple to Milano. And her husband just passed away, I think within the last 18 months or so. And they transformed Milano, and they have many other cities which they brought out, other shluchim, very successful, very dynamic, very learned, etc., etc. In the early years, Rabbi Gorelick, who was essentially the chief rabbi of Milano and then grew into a larger role actually in Italy, but he's chief rabbi of Milano, and he visits the Rebbe, and the Rebbe starts the conversation about Milano. We heard such good reports, and he says, but what about Lugano? How come I don't hear anything about Lugano? It's only like an hour and a half away by train from Milano. So he was very proud. He said, Rebbe, I have never been invited to speak there, and I'm still waiting for the opportunity. But I have to let you know that my wife has some friends in Lugano, and they invite her before Hanukkah and Purim and before Pesach, and she goes there regularly, and she teaches Hasidus. So though I have not yet been given the opportunity to teach Hasidus in Lugano, I want to let you know, my wife is doing it. And the Rebbe was very pleased, and a broad smile, this and that. This is coming from Mrs. Gorelick. She says one time, she obviously would prepare quite well because she's erudite. I mean, she understands the Rebbe's teachings, and she would prepare to give over a 45-minute learned class in language accessible and understandable, as well as something that would keep their interest. It's not so simple to do that. One time she was invited to give 2 classes, one for the women and one for like teenagers. So she didn't want to give the same class twice because inevitably there would be some that would be going for both. So she spent quite a couple of hours preparing 2 wonderful, learned Hasidic concepts, each one like 45 minutes or so. She's quite successful. Her first class goes over very well. In the afternoon, she gives her second class, goes over very well. She finished on time. And then there's a lady who gets up and says, Mrs. Gorelick, it was so enjoyable. You know, we don't want to go like take the break. Can you continue teaching? Which is, I mean, this is everyone's dream, right? To have students that don't want to leave the classroom. They want more. But what happened was her mind went blank. She had nothing to say. And like a very long, awkward minute passed. And she couldn't figure out what happened to everything that she knows, because every Shabbat she would give a class. And when the people sort of saw her hesitation, someone else got up and said, no, it's time for the break. And she left going back to Milano by train. It's an hour and a half, I believe, train ride. She's crying most of the way. She can't believe it. The Rebbe sent her to be a teacher. And here she was. She had an opportunity to teach, not only an opportunity to teach, they wanted to be inspired, and she had nothing to give. The fact that she had given 2 wonderful classes didn't even register to her. She was just focusing on the fact, am I so empty that after an hour and a half, I have nothing more to offer? And she called herself all kinds of names, very upset. And she wrote a long letter to the Rebbe describing what had happened, doubting that she's successful, and implying that the Rebbe should have sent someone else to represent him because she did a lousy job. She got back a beautiful letter from the Rebbe. The first part of the letter that she shared with her family, and now it's all over the world. The first part of the letter was a little bit off the subject, where the Rebbe spoke about the difference between planting wheat and planting an orchard. Wheat grows within a couple of months, but after the crop, it dies. There's nothing left of it, it's just straw, and you have to replant. If you don't replant, then it's just the first crop. Whereas an orchard, you plant, at times you have to wait years before you see fruit. But what you planted that took so much time to develop stays for a very long time. And the Rebbe was implying that her work on behalf of Hashem, and she represents the work of God through the Lubavitch label, she might not always see immediate results. But one thing she should be certain of, if she keeps teaching consistently and doing the work of the Rebbe, there will be results in the long run. It won't be immediate like a planting wheat, but it'll be something of beauty and everlasting like an orchard. And then he basically dealt with her self-doubt. And he says, I read your letter, and I'm wondering, do you doubt me? And he says in his humility, I will not be offended if you do doubt me, but knowing you, I don't think you doubt me. So if I sent you, that means I could not find anyone better. And that's how I want to close, the first segment of what every one of us probably could specify the places where we need improvement. A lot of places, believe me, a lot of places, ethically, morally, spiritually, physically, financially, etc., etc. But you know what? We are in the Rebbe's generation. And guys like me represent Chabad. As much as I am aware, and as much as I'm not aware of my deficiencies, I console myself and then motivate myself. 1 second, the Rebbe said, go out and do something. Obviously, I can do it with all of my deficiency. We are in a generation, we are living at a time where morally and ethically there's so much confusion out there. And we who hear the word of God, and we who are exposed to the teachings of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, whose day is today. Today we celebrate his teaching and his life, and to affirm that we will continue. All of us have that potential to truly shine and to kindle another candle. So, l'chaim, my friends, may our candle, our warmth spread outwards, and may we be in turn inspired by the people we inspire. L'chaim l'bracha. L'chaim. Achedo da da la dam bam 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 da da dum bam bim bam bam bim bam 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 da da dum bam bam da da dum bam bam da da dum bam bim bam 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 da da dum bam 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 dai la dai la dai da da dai la dai da 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 dum ba da bam 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 dai la dum da da dum bam 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 da da dum bam bim bam 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 hey la dai la dai la dum da da dum bam dai dum da da dum bam 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 dai ding dum bam bam dai la 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 bam bam bim bam bam bim bam bim bam 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 da bam bam bim bam bam da dum bam bim bam bam bim bam bam da dum bam bim bam 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 bim bam bim bam 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 da bam hey dum bam 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 da dum bam 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 da dum bam bam la 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 da dum bam bim bam 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 hey la 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 bam bam
da.
Dum bum 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 bum. Dum bum bim bum bim bum 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 bum. Dum bum bum. Dum bum bim bum bum. Bum 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 bum. Dum bum bum. Dum bum bim bum bum. Bum bum bim bum bum. We have to take a l'chaim break. L'chaim, l'chaim, everybody. L'chaim l'avracha. L'chaim. You know, many of us, it took a very long time to figure out what we wanted to do. So even before we got into, before we graduated middle school, we already were thinking of, I would like to do this, I would like to do that. Then in America, when you become a senior and you have to apply for a college, people go crazy, they go to therapy, they take aptitude tests. I don't know really what I want to go and what do I want to do. And people spend 4 years and then they decide to specialize. And then after they finish specialization, they decide that's not really what they want to do. And I don't have to repeat what all of us actually know. There are people that do one profession, they do a different profession, they have a midlife crisis, they change again, they're not sure. When do we actually know what to do and how to do it and where to do it? Wouldn't that be wonderful if we had that clarity of thought when we were 12? Instead of being 48, before we decide, I know now knowing myself, I know what brings me happiness. What I really want to do is drive a taxi. I have a PhD in 2 different fields, and I'm tired of kids. They're so ignorant. You know what? All I want to do is drive a taxi. So for that, you have to go for 14 years of schooling. If someone were to ask, looking at the Rebbe's teachings from his earliest youth, especially from the day that he took the leadership in 1950, what did the Rebbe want? What was his vision? And it's clear as the sun shines. The Rebbe wanted a world of goodness, a world of kindness, a world of holiness, a world of education, a world of peace, a world where humanity would live up to its name, human, not animal. And there's one word that encapsulates all of that, a world of Mashiach. I'm sure you've heard this before. When the first prime minister of Israel, David Ben-Gurion, was not known for his strict observance of Jewish tradition. When the state of Israel was formed, and he was thinking about how does one become a citizen of Israel, it was clear to him as well as to everyone else that Jewish people should be allowed to enter the land of Israel. They don't have to prove citizenship. The whole idea is that this is our homeland. But the question then was, how do you define a Jew? So he wrote this question to, I believe, 22 different Jewish leaders, asking them for their response. One of the Jewish leaders that he corresponded with was the young Lubavitcher Rebbe. Of course, the Rebbe wrote back a very detailed halachic answer, but it was very interesting. The Rebbe began with an apology because the prime minister is called the Nasi, the prince in Hebrew. And most of the responses were to the Nasi, the prince, which is the prime minister, David Ben-Gurion. But the Rebbe gave him a different title. So he started off almost with an apology. I'm sorry, I cannot use the traditional form of addressing you as Nasi, because the word Nasi, Prince of Israel, should be reserved for Mashiach. And all of my life, from the age of 4 and maybe before, he writes, I've always dreamt of this Nasi, this Prince of Israel, the Mashiach, that would make sense and explain why we have been in exile for so long. So for me, now I'm paraphrasing, for me, the title Prince of Israel or Exalted One of Israel can only be given on the Mashiach. So though it is a title that modern Hebrew has given the prime minister, I beg, and I'll call you Your Excellency or Your Highness or Your Majesty, it doesn't make a difference, but the Hebrew term Nasi is Mashiach. Now the Rebbe was not prone to exaggeration. When he wrote from the earliest age of 4 onwards, he dreamt and wondered and prayed and thought about the coming of Mashiach. This is not only a tzaddik, righteous, saintly, and holy, not only a person who is the truest of all leaders, because not only did he lead, but he empowered us to become leaders. In addition to all of that, he was laser focused on the goal, never had any hesitation. Maybe what I really want to do is make a shtetl Lubavitch. Maybe I'll make a little city of Lubavitch in America. Or maybe I will run one day to be the chief rabbi of Israel. No, nothing less than a world of perfection. You have to take a step back and just admire the concept. Most of us, if you think about our sphere of influence, most of us get stuck. We spend a lifetime trying to control ourselves. Some of us are moderately successful. Few of us are extremely successful, and many of us are not successful. We can't control our eating. We can't control our anger. We can't control our jealousy. But if you're a dreamer, you might say, I want to have the ideal family. If your dreams are even more expansive, you know what? I want to be a community activist. I want to change the community for the better. How many people have a thought, I want to change the world for the better? I want 7 billion people to be changed, to be transformed. People that I've never met, whose languages I cannot speak, who live in locations I will never visit. I have a vision for them as well. Not any less powerful than the vision I have for the people that are living on my street. That's like 1 in 100 million. You say, well, this person really has a great imagination. Let's see what he's able to do. And us in the secular year 2021 can look around the globe and find the Rebbe's picture in every continent, can find the Rebbe's representatives in every continent, in every major city, and can find the influence of his teachings not only amongst Jews, but amongst heads of state, as well as in places such as in Africa, where the Chabad house gives out medicine and food for the people that are living near the Chabad house, none of them that share the same complexion of skin, none of them that share the same spiritual background. It's unheard of, unparalleled, that a Jewish leader can have so much spiritual power recognized by not only his Hasidim, devoted followers, but by the world at large. As the years pass, it's amazing how much more of the Rebbe's greatness becomes revealed. There are letters today being published where you see the Rebbe is actually in correspondence. He's corresponding with non-Jewish philosophers, scientists, and literally heads of state. The Rebbe's vision of a world of Mashiach, to paraphrase the words of the Rambam, there will come a time when the world will be filled with the knowledge of God. The world means, and this is something insightful that the Rebbe points out, that means humanity. Doesn't only mean Jews. The days of the Mashiach means that you might be traveling to Barbados, beautiful beaches, and what people will be occupied is in the knowledge that God exists and that God is good, that God creates, and that we are in his image, a world of godliness, not of crass materialism. What is the world filled with right now? At best, selfishness. And the Jews, if humanity will be a humankind where people will have a brain that's occupied not with what we call education, but with divine intelligence, what will the Jewish people be? And in the words of the Rambam, Chachomim Gedolim, exceedingly wise in the ways of God. So when people will be interested in understanding what does it mean that our Creator who created us is still creating us, they will travel to the Holy Land of Israel and they might encounter me or you. Yeah, you, the people listening to, and say, please, you're very wise in the ways of God. Can you explain this to me? Well, what about all of the goodness of this world? Ma'adanim mitzuyim ka'ofer. There will be delightful things all over. Beautiful clothing, healthy, nourishing, delicious food, fresh air, everything that the environmentalists will paint a picture for you will be even greater in the days of the Mashiach. And you know what? It will be so prevalent, no one will be jealous of what someone else has because it will be accessible to all. There will be no envy, no competition, no war. Instead, the resources of this beautiful universe will be dedicated to the pursuit of goodness and of godliness. That is a vision of Mashiach, and the Rebbe lived that vision. Amazing. It wasn't a dream, a pipe dream. He was actively agitating that this is possible in our lifetime. So in that very famous, maybe 20-second, you see it on Jewish educational media in 1992, when a CNN reporter says to the Rebbe, Rebbe, what is your message about Mashiach? He turns around and he says, everyone should increase in goodness and in kindness, and then the Mashiach will come. Notice he didn't say, if we find the cure for cancer, Mashiach will come. If today we would say, if we can only get rid of COVID, Mashiach will come. No, he put the emphasis on humanity. Be more human, Mashiach will come. And for a Jew, be more Jewish, and Mashiach will come. And of course, you can't be more Jewish, you're already the way you are, but I'm sure you understand why I'm using that expression. How do you think the Rebbe was able to look at people like us? What did he see in us? Well, it is said that there were two holy students. This takes us back over 150 years. The names are not important at this stage. Both of them grew up very demanding of themselves to be sincerely devoted servants of the Almighty. No hypocrisy, no duplicity, pure truth. And these two students of a great Hasidic master developed into Hasidic leaders, very pious and holy. They were known for their love of truth and for the absolute demands on themselves to be truthful in thought, in speech, in action, between man and between man and God. One of these Hasidic leaders had a very few followers. The other Hasidic leader had abundance. He had multitudes. Wherever he went, he was surrounded by hundreds of admirers. Now, these two tzaddikim, they were both righteous. They once met, and as they're talking about the way they serve Hashem, the one that has a few Hasidim manages to say to his friend, I'm a bit surprised that you're able to have so many Hasidim. So his friend says to him, I am surprised you have so few Hasidim. I know how great you are. I know how sincere you are. You are beloved in heaven. I don't understand why you're not beloved on earth. He said, actually, I could have more Hasidim. It's just that I can't look at them. When a person comes and claims he wants to be my follower, he wants to follow my instructions, I see he's not honest. He wants a miracle from me. That's what he wants. He wants me to bless him that he shouldn't have any trouble from his neighbors. He's not interested in my religious instruction. He claims he's here to be inspired by me, but all he wants is that I should get rid of his troubles. I should pray on his behalf. That deceit, that lie that they have in him, I just can't respond to it. So when the people feel that from me, they're not attracted. And then he turns around and he says, but that actually causes me to question. I know you're an honest tzaddik, and I know when we were growing up together, we demanded absolute honesty and sincerity. How is it possible that you have so many Hasidim? Don't you hate lying? Don't you hate the deceit? And he said, of course I do. But I love the truth that they have. You see, what you see is the 99% lie that they have and that 1% of truth. I see the 1% of truth and I don't even notice the 99% of the lie. So both of us detest deceit. Both of us love truth. But the question is, what do you see? You're looking at the negative that they possess. I look at the positive that they possess. And it makes no difference how small that positive is. That positive is real. Somehow, I'm not superimposing this story on the Rebbe. I'm really pointing out, for me, it provides a possible insight. The Rebbe was not a foolish man, heaven forbid. The Rebbe saw truth. And he saw in every one of us, every man, every woman, every child, every saint, every sinner, even every non-Jew, he focused on the spark of godliness that they had. And he said that what you have is true and authentic. Build on it. I don't know if anyone could actually count how many people that encountered the Rebbe who just from seeing him and spending a short couple of seconds literally in his presence, that walked out saying, I don't know if I'm going to become a Shomer Shabbos and get rid of all of my non-kosher dishes, but one thing I do know, I will be more Jewish. I will fast on Yom Kippur. I might break up with my non-Jewish spouse or friend. I might decide, at least today, to put on tefillin. Somehow the Rebbe focused on the goodness of people. And that's something which is, it's not a trick. It's a discipline. And the Rebbe wanted us to do the same. Not to be foolish and to welcome a thief into your house, but to look even at a thief and to realize there might be something worth salvaging. There might be something good there. And if you could only access that, if you could only touch that, if you could only expose that, you've saved a life. You've saved a person. This is a vision which is messianic because it goes beyond the surface. One of the ways we could distinguish between the days of the Mashiach and now is the difference between trying to figure out what's in a box while it's in the box, and finally taking off the cover and seeing what's in the box. You see this big box, that refrigerators come in. It could be like a small house. Most of us would figure out that it's not a pencil. This person did not order a pencil or crayon set because it wouldn't come in such a big box. But how do you know it's a refrigerator? Maybe it's a bicycle. Maybe it is a pen. You know what? There's nothing there. It's a mistake. Well, open the box. This is a world of goodness and of holiness. It's covered up. Our job is to lift off the cover, not to create it. It's there. It's a godly world. Mashiach means a time when the covers, the concealments will be taken away. So that's true in the world. It's going to be a world that's filled with delightful things. We won't see dead trees anymore. We won't see cesspools because the environment will be revealed as a magnificent world that Hashem created, virtually a type of a Gan Eden. And when we look at each other, we won't see the goodness that we possess hidden. It will be revealed. You will see, here on my block live 14, 15 families, each and every one of them decent, honest, ethical, wonderful. That will be in the days of Mashiach. Says the Rebbe, discipline yourself. Look at that now. Why do you have to see the negative? Focus on the positive. Start with yourself. Don't focus on yesterday I didn't give charity. Focus on today I can. Don't spend time moping that yesterday I didn't put on tefillin. Put on tefillin tomorrow. Don't regret that I didn't call my parents already for 2 weeks. Pick up the phone and call. There's a goodness in you. You want your parents. You don't want to hurt them. You don't want to ignore them. You're just busy, right? So focus on the goodness that you possess and act upon it. That's messianic. It's a discipline that the Rebbe showed us how to do it. So when by every Farbrengen, every gathering, the Rebbe would speak for hours about Torah and mitzvahs, looking at the people around him, touching them. The most graphic part of it was the last 6 years, where every Sunday, thousands of people, and I was privileged to be there more than once, would stand in line 2 hours, 3 hours, sometimes even 4.5 hours. And the Rebbe would look, he would connect, he would give you a physical dollar, and he would say, go out and change the world for the better. And you left. And you said to yourself, he gave me $1, I'm going to give $5 to charity. I'm keeping this $1 as a good luck charm, but I have to give it. I'll give more. I'll be better, because the Rebbe empowered us to be better. I want to tell two parables about Mashiach. Parable number one. This vision of a godly world where people are involved in intelligence and where goodness is very, very real, not evil. Goodness is actually tangible. And they talk so much about climate, where the world is functioning the way it's supposed to, with harmony. And we ask ourselves the question, do we deserve Mashiach? If people preceding us generations ago, there were many more holy people and many more devoted people and many more committed, there wasn't such a rate of assimilation or apathy. If you were Jewish, you lived Jewishly. And Mashiach did not come because of their good deeds. So are you telling me that if I give $1 to charity, or I stretch out my hand for tefillin, or I put up a $45 mezuzah on my door, now Mashiach will come because I added so much goodness and holiness to the world? My goodness and holiness that I added is minuscule. Do you know that my great-grandparents, they deserved Mashiach because they prayed and they studied and they had an open house and they put up with abuse and they had faith. Their goodness and kindness and holiness should have brought Mashiach. But if they couldn't do it, how can I do it? So here's a parable. There was once a king who fought against his enemy, and the stronghold of the enemy was a castle surrounded by a very thick wall. Prior to the age of explosives, the only way you could get the wall to fall was with a battering ram. So he built battering rams, and he had his finest, his strongest come and use all of their strength to batter the wall. But you know something? The wall seemed to be made out of iron. It didn't move. And in the meantime, these hundreds of soldiers who are professional and strong use their muscles to keep battering, and nothing is changing. And of course, the longer they're out there, they're exposed to the arrows and many casualties. So they retreat with the battering ram. The king says to the next batch, do it. Of course, one does not question the order. They run out and they batter and they use their force and their energy, and nothing that to their eyes changes. And of course, they're exposed, many casualties. It's brought back. This continues for weeks at an end, until finally all of his finest troops are decimated. The only people that are left are actually the cooks and the people that are in charge of the animals and some of the wives that tagged along. And they were in the back. And the king says to them, the wall has to be broken. Go out and batter the wall. And they say, Your Majesty, thousands and thousands of your finest soldiers who are so powerful and strong, they were not successful. And this wall has been battered incessantly for already 8 months, and it hasn't been broken. How do you expect us weaklings to do it? To which the king said, I've sent some spies. The wall, it has been weakened. It just needs the final push. You don't have to be as strong. You don't have to have as much energy. Give what you got, and you will see that the wall will fall. And sure enough, his words were true. So this parable is given. Yes, it's true that in pre-war Poland, there were hundreds of thousands of Hasidim and of students of Torah and great leaders, and they couldn't bring Mashiach. And before them, there were equally great people, and they couldn't bring Mashiach. So how could me and you bring Mashiach? What are we compared to them? We're midgets, pygmies. They were giants. And the response is, they weakened the walls. What we have to do is give it the best we can. We will be successful. It will be based on what they have already accomplished. The job is almost done, but it's us to get the glory. It's us to celebrate the success. It's a beautiful parable. It is very true. And yet there's something disturbing about that parable. Because that parable says that the people before us were greater, hence more deserving, whereas we're stragglers. We're leftovers. We're remnants. But you know what? To finish the job, our minuscule efforts will be successful. That's one perspective. The other perspective is they were not successful. And I'm hesitant to say this. They were not successful because they did not deserve it. To put it slightly differently, they were not successful because it wasn't the time. Now is the time. Because never before in the history of mankind is the world more in need of Mashiach. Not only more in need of Mashiach, but never has the world been more receptive to Mashiach. 500 years ago, if you were to tell a person that, it will come a time where people will live very long, 120 will be considered average, and people won't die of sickness. There won't be any sickness. They would have looked at you as if literally you're a madman. That's not even conceivable. Well, how about 150 years ago? 150 years ago, they would say like this, there'll come a time when education will be universal. Every person will read and write, think, converse, communicate, and this will be children. Children will be able to communicate, articulate. That you are crazy. It will never happen. If you went 80 years ago and you told a person that it is possible to actually communicate instantaneously with any person anywhere on earth, also crazy, and so on and so forth. The concept of Mashiach in those days necessitated a leap of faith. Today, it's not even a leap of faith. The world has evolved in a way where we could say that there is a person who could have a global influence. And people would say, yeah, that is correct. It's possible. We could say that in a moment, we could change from darkness to light, from sickness to health. We just found the cure of AIDS. We found the cure of cancer. It's all in this little pill. How many people would say it's not possible? It's possible. What took so long? Do you remember pre-COVID when they were talking about that we need some type of vaccine? I'm not getting involved whether it's good or not, just the concept. Today, every kid knows that you could take a vaccine and it's supposed to protect you. The world is so receptive, it's so ready to hear that there's a better, more correct way to look at human beings than the way we do it now. And as I mentioned, all of the negatives have touches of the positive. We're against racism, we're against discrimination. We're looking for goodness. We're just looking in the wrong way. Our Rebbe said, this is the generation that can do it. This is the generation that has to do it. And in fact, he went so far as to say, this is the generation that is doing it. We actually are creating messianic goodness. Every one of us is creating messianic goodness by being good with others and by being good to God and by caring about a fellow Jew in particular. We are creating a messianic world. We just need that last push, so to speak, that the Mashiach reveal himself. And for Hasidim, if we had to look, is it possible to have one person bring out so much goodness? All we have to do is look at the Rebbe. We saw it in front of our eyes. One person in 770, he never visited Africa. He never flew back to Russia. He never even flew to Israel. Spent his lifetime in a small Jewish community in Brooklyn, New York. And there isn't a place on the globe where his name is not mentioned with reverence and with respect. Is that not messianic? I don't know. To me, it's the closest thing to the true Mashiach. Well, this holy Rebbe chose us. We're his Hasidim, we're his followers, we're his admirers, We are his students. We are his emissaries. When it comes a day like today, which is the culmination of all of the positive energies that the Rebbe unleashed. I say the words, I actually believe the words, though I don't really feel it because it's just beyond me. It's an awesome day of blessing where all of the goodness that the Rebbe generated comes together. At the very least, we got to be a little bit more good, if you could use that word. We have to improve in something. And I would start with the most obvious. Look with a good eye at your spouse. Look with a good eye at your children. Look with show a friendly face. Thank God the mask could go off. Smile at people. L'chaim, everybody. L'chaim, l'bracha. L'chaim. Yisrael, have no fear, Mashiach will be here this year. Yisrael, have no fear, Mashiach will be here this year. We want Mashiach now, we want Mashiach now, we don't want to wait. We want Mashiach now, we want Mashiach now, we want Mashiach now. We don't want to wait. Yisrael, have no fear, Mashiach will be here this year. Yisrael, have no fear, Mashiach will be here this year. We want Mashiach now, we want Mashiach now, we want Mashiach now, we don't want to wait. We want Mashiach now, we want Mashiach now, we want Mashiach now, we don't want to wait. It's very hard for me to gauge who I'm talking to and how you're feeling and so on. I'm looking at the clock, it's 9:25. I'm assuming that for most of us, it's late. So I'm going to conclude, even though we really just started a subject. And I hope the next Farbrengen we have will be with the Rebbe in Israel. And at the very least, in person. But let me end off with a miracle story that's not a miracle story. It's famous, but I don't know if you know it. There is a very esteemed, respected psychologist rabbi, PhD in psychology, and he's a very, very respected, knowledgeable rabbi. His name is Rabbi Tzvi Hirsch Weinreb. He was the vice president of Orthodox Union. I'm pretty sure, I have to go downstairs and check, but the Steinsaltz Gemara that was translated in English, I believe he's one of the editors. He's very knowledgeable and very accomplished as a community activist, as a rabbi, as a very intelligent man. He has a wonderful story. He says 3 years after, this is Rabbi Tzvi Hirsch talking, or actually Dr. Tzvi Hirsch to be more correct. He says, after I married, I moved to Silver Springs, Maryland, where he attended the University of Maryland and got a PhD in psychology. And he began working as a psychologist in a local school system. That's usually enough to keep you full-time employed. And your day is quite busy. You have a wife, you have children, you have responsibilities, and you have a profession in helping people. But he's a rabbi as well. So he used to give every Shabbos a public class in Talmud. And because he is quite scholarly, he used to give a private class every Tuesday night, rigorous Talmudic scholarship for a smaller group. He was in his early 30s, which he says with a smile, it's a little bit early to have a midlife crisis, but he did. And he wasn't sure what to do with his life. He's accomplished in psychology. He's accomplished in Torah. He is an ordained rabbi. What should he do? Should he give up the psychology and become a Torah teacher? If the Rebbe thinks that he should stay in psychiatry, should he go into private practice, or should he stay in the school system? He was given an offer from one of the social organizations from from the state of Maryland? He really wasn't sure. Also, he wasn't sure about his children. Should he stay in Maryland? Should he move back to New York? He spoke with a lot of people, and he was not satisfied. No one could really give him the right answer until someone told him, there's the Lubavitcher Rebbe. He's not a chassid at this time. And he said, why don't you go call the Rebbe? So he had heard about the Rebbe, but he was not a chassid per se, and certainly had no special affiliation with the Rebbe. In fact, he had never corresponded with the Rebbe, never met the Rebbe. But hearing so much about him, he decided, what has he got to lose? He is reputed to be a very wise man. So he calls up the Rebbe's secretary to make an appointment. When he calls 770, Rabbi Chodakov, who was the Rebbe's secretary, answers very simply, hello, who is this? And right away he was impressed because 770 is the headquarters of Chabad. Today, if you don't get a recording, which is more often than not, you get a receptionist that says, hello, who can I connect you with? And then you have to wait for many minutes until someone connects you to someone to connect you to someone. But over here, the secretary himself answers and says, who is this? As the secretary is saying, who is this? I could hear a voice in the background in Yiddish saying, Veret, who's calling? And he said, I surmised right away that the words in Yiddish that I heard was from the Lubavitcher Rebbe. So when Rabbi Chodakov, the secretary, says, who's calling? And he could hear the Rebbe's voice in the back saying, who's calling? He answers in Yiddish, a Yid from Maryland. Who's calling? A Jew from Maryland. Secretary says, and why are you calling? He says, well, I'm a rabbi, I'm a psychologist, I have many questions, some questions about faith, some questions about personal stuff. I'm not sure about my direction in life. Should I do it professionally with psychology? Should I do it professionally with Torah study? And as I'm speaking in English to Rabbi Chodakov was repeating the words in Yiddish. So Tzvi Weinrab says, I imagine he was doing that for the benefit of the Rebbe. After I finish why I want to speak with the Rebbe, he hears the Rebbe say to Rabbi Chodakov, Zog der Yid, tell the Jew from Maryland that there's a Yid was heißt Weinrab. Soll reden mit dem Yid. Tell the guy on the phone that there's a Jew whose name is Weinrab, and he should talk it over with him. Tzvi Weinrab can't believe this. How does the Rebbe know that there's a Jew, Tzvi Weinrab, who's living in Maryland? He just called up the secretary. The secretary said, who's calling? His answer was, a Jew from Maryland. What does the Jew from Maryland want? I want to talk to the Rebbe because I have a lot of questions. What is the Rebbe answering? Tell him to talk to Tzvi Weinrab. He couldn't believe this. So he says to the secretary, my name is Tzvi Weinrab. And the secretary, he could hear the secretary gulp. I mean, this is not caller ID. There was no caller ID. So the secretary says out loud to the Rebbe, the Yid from Maryland who's calling, his name is Tzvi Weinrab. To which the Rebbe said, well, if that's the case, so let him talk to himself. And he repeated it twice, and he hung up. Now, Tzvi Weinrab who's telling us this miracle story, he said, in addition to this idea of the Rebbe knew my name, where I was living, and I never introduced myself to him, it's on the phone. What did the Rebbe mean when he said, let him talk to Tzvi Weinreb? And this is his interpretation. The Rebbe was telling me, you're not a kid anymore. You're in your 30s. You're a rabbi. You're a psychologist. Why are you looking for someone to make your decisions? You could do it. Talk to yourself. Ask yourself, if someone came to me for advice, what would I say? And he then writes this article, and he says, this miracle from the Rebbe is so, all of his life he's kept this. Whenever he has a question, he studies something of the Rebbe's writings, and then he says, if I were to ask myself as a stranger this question, what would I answer? Sometimes you have to talk to yourself. Personally, I love this story because I find it very, very deep and informative. Too many of us look for outside help when it's not necessary. You don't need someone to tell you how to improve being a more sincere Jew. You need a rabbi to tell you. You can't figure out yourself where you could use a little bit more encouragement. Because if you're looking for the outside answer, what happens if you don't find that person that you're looking for? How many people are still looking for their guru? Well, I went to this synagogue, I went to that synagogue. It's my third therapist. Maybe you should stop talking with therapists. Maybe you should start talking to yourself. What would the Rebbe advise me is really a very powerful way to know what to do. And with this, I'm going to wish you a very good night. Everyone should ask themselves, as it says in the Hayom Yom, what can I do? You don't need to ask a rabbi or a scholar or someone outside of you. Ask yourself, what can I do to make my life more filled with the warmth of Judaism? What can I do to help someone else's life, to improve someone else's life? What can I do to make this world a more decent, kosher world? Talk to yourself. You'll come up with some amazing answers. The Rebbe delegated it to us. He says, I did what I had to do. Now I'm incorporating you into me, basically. My job is to bring Mashiach. Now it's our job to bring Mashiach. L'chaim, everybody.
L'chaim, l'chaim.
L'chaim l'bracha.
L'chaim.
Ruby, I haven't seen you in years.
I haven't, well, soon.
L'chaim, l'chaim l'bracha. Okay, let's do one rousing song, and before we say goodnight. L'chaim.
All right, let's go.
What's a good song? And Da-da-da-da-dum, da-da-dum, 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 bam, da-da-dum, bam, bam, da-da-dum, bam, bam, da-da-dum, bam, bim, bam, bam, da-da-dum, bam, bam, da-da-dum, bam, bim, bam, bam, da-da-dum, bam, bam, da-da-dum, bam, bim, bam, bam, da-da-dum, bam, 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 bim, bam, 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 bim, bam, bam. Good night, everybody.
Shkoyach.
Muslim.
Good night. Thank you so much. It was wonderful.
You're very welcome. And 8:15 is Tanya tomorrow. Okay, good night.
Hey, Laila Tov.
Thank you so much. Good night.
Shalom, bye-bye.
Good night.
Night.
Bye-bye.